Can me feel it, you? You get me, got you. You get me, can me feel it, you? You get me.
Hi, I'm Corey Nathan, and this is Talking Politics and Religion Without Killing Each Other. Your home for engaging conversations about the topics that matter most in our culture. If you love nuance, if you want to better understand different points of view, if you're tired of the screamers taking all the oxygen out of the room, if you'll enjoy edifying, provocative, and fun conversations among high-profile public figures and regular folks like me, you love talking politics and religion without killing each other. Thanks for spending some time with us. Enjoy today's show. Welcome to Talking Politics and Religion Without Killing Each Other. This is a special episode. You know me, Corey Nathan, I'm your host, and I am joined by our special co-host, Jessica the Reporter Stone. Jessica, as you'll remember, is a 20-year veteran of local, national, and international newsrooms, where she's covered the intersection of politics and business around the world. Her work has appeared in Yahoo Finance, USA Today, South China Morning Post, and Stansberry Research, and she's appeared on FOX and CBS radio and television. Jessica, so cool to see you again, and so awesome of you to join our team. How you doing?
It's great to be here. It's great to meet your dad face to face. Of course, I listened to his podcast with you, and just I feel like I'm falling in love with the whole Nathan family. What can I tell you?
I feel like Mishpacha.
Got more of you to meet, but
we'll invite you to the Seder next year.
Yeah,
that would be great. That would be great.
Next year in Santa Clarita.
In Santa Clarita, yeah. I was gonna say.
Yeah,
it'd be closer if we say next year in Brooklyn, but anyways.
There you go. And we're co-produced by my pal Tristan Drew. And as always, please hit that subscribe button and leave us a review on iTunes. Give us a shout on Facebook, Twitter, IG, and LinkedIn. We'd love to hear from you. And today's guest, which is kind of, what is it, a bait and switch? Well, I'll just say our other co-host and my dear old dad, Ronnie Nathan, we thought it would be fun to mix things up a bit, to have a major league journalist join us, take this thing to a whole other level, and finally bring some tough questions to the old man. Now, we might learn a bit more about Ronnie's background, my dad's background, and points of view. We might get into some politics and religion. I mean, that's what we do. We'll just see where things go from here and hopefully have some fun. Pops, thanks for joining us and putting up with us. It's an honor to have you, as always. Jessica, take it away.
I would love to hear the story of how you first became aware of your first name. And first of all, we should start with, what is your first name? Is it Ronnie?
No. My legal first name is Hyman. My name is Hyman Ronald Nathan. I never knew my name was Hyman until I got to school. And my first day of school was first grade. Back then, because I'm at the beginning of the baby boomers, they didn't have room for me in kindergarten, and they wouldn't let me in. So I started school as a first grader, and they never called my name. And I sat at my desk crying because they never called my name.
Oh.
And Mrs. Moran came up to me and said, what's going on? I said, you never called my name. And she said, well, who are you? And I said, I'm Ronnie Nathan. She said, no, your name is Hyman.
That's when you found out.
At
you
that
never
moment.
Knew.
And yeah.
Wow. How could your parents hold out on you like that?
I don't think they held out on me.
I mean,
we were all named after the same grandfather who had died in 1939-40. And he was apparently a great man. Everybody loved him. So every male who was born in my generation carries his name.
Did you know what your Hebrew name was, Dad?
Chaim Reuben. Oh, yeah, sure.
Yeah, Chaim Reuben. So you knew Chaim Reuben, but you didn't connect it to your first name, to your American name.
I never thought about it, really. I was Ronnie. Everybody called me Ronnie. That's who I was. Yeah. And suddenly I became Hyman. And that had a really big impact on my life. And I could always tell from the first week of school who my good teachers were and who my bad teachers were. Because the good teachers would call me Ronnie. And that's the story of the name.
I have to ask you, you talked about the sort of grouping of a lot of people growing up together in the apartment. Did every family have its own bathroom? Did the building have bathrooms on different floors?
We had a bathroom in each apartment.
because there's a story, and I don't know if you've ever read it, The Carp in the Bathtub.
I
This
hope
is a
it's
story
about
about a woman who
yeah,
gefilte
yeah.
fish, and she makes it so fresh that she gets the carp fresh. Everybody else is buying dead carp. She gets the fish alive and keeps it alive in the bathtub.
That was a very common practice when I was a kid. Lots of people did that.
Did you
No.
do that?
My grandmother worked. We were too busy working. But we did get live chickens every Friday at the chicken market. Oh, sure.
Really?
And I had the distinct pleasure of watching the Shokit kosher slaughter the chicken and pluck the chicken.
You feel like they felt happy in their final
The
moments?
chickens. I never thought
Yeah.
about their emotional state of being as they were being killed.
Isn't that the principle of a kosher butcher, that you're having a kind end to these animals' lives?
All of the laws relating to kosher slaughter have to do with kindness to animals. Slitting the throat in such a way with a very sharp knife so that death is instant and painless.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure anyone thinks about what the animal is thinking of as the knife is going across his throat. And I never thought about it.
Except for the
I'll have
PETA.
to think. I'll have to think about that.
The PETA members of the Nathan family, they're thinking about it. And so
You just made me into a vegetarian.
Don't worry, Dad.
Hey, I did it for 24 years and it was all because of chickens. That's a whole nother kettle of fish.
Emerson and I are reading The Problem of Pain, C.S. Lewis's book right now, together. Reading and I'm at the point where C.S. Lewis is making the case, a pretty erudite case, for why dogs go to heaven. But that's
really? Okay. Yeah, that I'll have to hear more about that theological point of
But
view. I would
only
like
if
to
they're
believe that. I don't
circumcised,
know if
Corey.
Ronnie, you're in first grade. You're having all these feelings about your name. Do you feel like you grew up as a person that kind of had a good sense of self, or did you have a lot of baggage from that incident and maybe some others? Sounds like there was a lot of complexity.
I was the youngest person in the house. I'm a boy, and being the baby boy in a Jewish family is a very privileged position to be in. Everybody loves you. Everybody nurtures you, but you're not supposed to make waves. Your job is to be a good boy and make everybody else happy. And I'm very grateful for that, because that's kind of like defined my life. And it's not a bad place to be. Everybody loving you and you trying to make everybody else happy. It's not a bad prescription for living a good life.
Your role as a joyful servant leader of the family, I think, is a pretty good description. And the fact that everybody loves you, despite you being a pain in the ass, tits gemacha at times. Yeah, no, I think that's accurate.
So one of the things I'm curious about for you, Ronnie, is what it was like to grow up in Brooklyn in terms of race relations. I know that race relations going into the 60s were pretty hot times. Can you kind of fast forward a little bit and talk about your observations going into that period? You would have been in your late teens, early 20s by then.
The world I grew up in was all Jewish and Italian, mostly Italian. I grew up in Bensonhurst in Brooklyn, so it's mostly Italian, maybe a third Jewish. The only people in the world that I knew that existed were Jews, Italians, and when you hit the trains, the BMT, Puerto Ricans and Black people. As I grew up and came into my own, the civil rights movement was hot and heavy. As a Jew, I identified with that because I grew up in the shadow of the Holocaust. You couldn't be Jewish. I'm a first generation American. My mother was born in Russia. She escaped pogroms. The whole maternal family came here exactly 100 years ago last month. And we lost people in the Holocaust. So the Holocaust was like real to me. Still is. but that drew me to have great empathy with the civil rights movement of the early 60s. And then my father, when he left the store, became an insurance salesman in Bed-Stuy, and his whole clientele was Black. And I had the experience of meeting his clients and going with him. And I even did business. I had a photography business at a certain point and took pictures in the Black community. So for the first time in my life, I was introduced to Black people on an individual level. And it struck me that the way they lived in Brooklyn, wasn't that much different than the segregation in the South. It struck me that we had the same kind of issues. They just weren't explicit. We pretended that we weren't living in an apartheid society, but we did. Well,
there were different parts of town. I mean, people didn't really integrate, right? You would have had. You said you didn't really see Blacks and Puerto Ricans until you went on the train.
Right. Exactly. Then later on, I got a job in a predominantly minority high school. And I stopped relating to Black people as Black people and started relating to them as individuals. And I basically that's how I am today. I mean, I'm still in touch with many of the kids who are now in their 50s that I counseled back in the 80s when they were in high school.
Mm-hmm. What do you think made that turn for you? Just familiarity, or was there a catalyst there?
I've always identified with the underdog because I was an underdog. I mean, I was a short Jewish kid playing ball in an Italian schoolyard for most of my childhood. And learning to stick up for myself, earning respect without creating conflict or escalating conflict, gave me an insight into how other people who are discriminated against and persecuted must feel, and strategies for dealing with that place in life. And that also stood me in good stead my whole life. I mean, I went into a career that required those skills and required me to be able to teach them to other people. And that's really been a gift, and I'm very grateful for that.
So when Martin Luther King Jr. comes on the scene, did the message of nonviolence resonate with you, or did you feel like something more needed to be done, something more forceful?
That's a great question. I think all of us were kind of innocent up until JFK was killed. Once the president was killed and Malcolm X came on the scene and all that stuff started to happen in Vietnam, I think my generation, at least I did, came to the realization that nonviolence is great when you're dealing with people who have values. You can't. Nonviolence wouldn't have worked in Germany in 1933 for Jews. So there's so it has a certain limit. I mean, I think at a certain point, you have to respect the fact that people get angry and are going to act out of anger.
So how does that shape what you think about what's going on now? Because I think we're safe to say we're witnessing that over the last let's say, year to 18 months. And we've certainly seen with the lockdown and the riots of last summer that there is so much pent up frustration. People are not taking the nonviolent route.
What I learned as a guidance counselor and assistant principal in predominantly Black and Latino high schools in New York City through the 70s, 80s, and 90s is that when people have a legitimate reason for being angry, you have to give them, you don't have to, but the best strategy is to give them an outlet to express that anger, and not just an outlet to express it, but an outlet to express it in a venue where they feel they're being heard and they're making a difference. If you don't do that, they will become violent. If you give them a legitimate venue for making a difference and being heard and respected, that lowers the probability of violence, in my opinion. I think what we're doing today, and the mistake that conservatives as a group make, is demonizing the protesters in the name of protecting society from looting. I think if as a society we legitimized protesting, legitimized what they're protesting against, and brought them into the decision making, made them stakeholders in preventing violence, I think that would be much better than, more successful in preventing violence than demonizing it and saying, oh, these protesters, Black Lives Matter, they're criminals, they're looting. To me, that's a better way.
Let me drill down on that, because I wonder what is the best way to give them that outlet. They're not getting it in Congress. They're not getting it at the State House. We haven't seen significant reforms in extra, police on victim crimes. We've seen some police department efforts to address that, but we haven't seen any large legislation pass. So where do you suggest they find that outlet? And then conversely, do people that criticize the violence not have a point?
No, they absolutely have a point. Absolutely have a point. Let me address that on two levels. The first level is, believe it or not, I'm kind of optimistic, and I'll tell you why. Because I think the best things that happen in society don't happen in Congress or legislatures. What I see happening right now is all of this protest and all of this violence is beginning to create an infrastructure that holds police accountable for excessive violence. Every time there's a cell phone recording of something terrible happening, it gets tremendous coverage in the news. Black leaders end up in Minneapolis.
Oh, wait. Well, we don't know that every single cell phone video of every single...
It's certainly hitting the news often enough to get police to wake up and say, we got to do something about this. We have to do something about this. I think there's an infrastructure developing without legislation that's bringing attention to police accountability.
Like Dr. Errol Souther's Lewis Registry, that has been instituted from what I've seen as a policy. The Lewis Registry, Jessica, it tracks with, as we all understand, a vast majority of law enforcement officers are serving our communities and our country well and admirably. It's the very, very small minority who are, who behave in misconduct that are giving police a worse name than they deserve. But it's been hard to this point to track the bad actors from one police force to another. The Lewis Registry tracks these things. Dr. L. Southers is a lifelong law enforcement officer serving at every level, literally from dog catcher to the highest levels of federal. And he's been a proponent of the Lewis Registry. So yeah, that's just one example where there is.
But I mean,
built-in-
even I'm like, I'm not a big fan of Al Sharpton, but the fact that Al Sharpton shows up all over the country and exploits these situations is kind of forcing the system to deal with it instead of closing our eyes and not dealing with it. I had a job for about 4.5, 5 years as a crisis response coordinator for 23 high schools when there was a riot, a race riot or a gang conflict or a murder in a high school in New York between 1991 and 1995. In my 23 high schools, I was called in with my team to stabilize the school, deal with the crisis, and then stay there and do the work necessary to prevent it from happening again. And I became the trained mediator, and I often mediated disputes between people who had been killing each other or trying to kill each other and driving the school into chaos. And the first step, my first goal, wasn't to resolve whatever issue there was between these two groups. My first goal was just to get them to talk to each other. And the second goal was to empower the leadership to find the strength and skill to stop listening to the knuckleheads and defending them when they were driving the group to extreme behaviors. That was what the mediation was about. Once we could do that, we would be able to resolve or at least control the issue that had led to the explosion. When I became...
What was the longest it ever took for you to
I was
get...
in mediations that took a week or more. I mean, we had
I mean, the period of time from when you started to when you actually got them to speak to each other. What was the longest amount of time?
Usually, I mean, it's going to sound funny, but it's true. Usually about 4.5 hours, because you'd start the mediation in the morning and the kids would be angry. But when it was time to either eat lunch or go home, they were very quick to start talking to each other. So that you have to, when you're doing stuff like this, you have to think about all these things. Are people hungry? Do they have to go to the bathroom? Do they, and it's kind of like Congress can solve a problem when they're at the 11th hour, and the cliff is about to.
I would argue not even then.
They find the Band-Aid.
But maybe then.
But all of a sudden stuff started to happen at 2:30 in the afternoon in the first mediation. That was pretty typical. When I became an assistant principal in a school that I would say at least 50 to 60% of the boys were gang involved in the school where I became an assistant principal. And they had a lot of trouble in the school with graffiti and gang issues and all kinds of stuff. One of the things that I did, two of the things, I started a peer mediation program.
What years were these, Ronnie?
I was an assistant
in the
90s. It was after crack hit the streets of New York. Schools became pretty violent after that in New York City. I created this peer mediation program where I trained kids to mediate disputes between other kids. But the kids that I trained to be peer mediators were the gang leaders. Why? Number one, they're very good at this stuff if they learn the skills. Number two.
And they have respect, right?
Well, first you give them respect, and then kids are great. I mean, kids, if you give kids respect, they give you respect right back. 90% of them.
But they have respect from their
Oh,
peers.
sure.
Yeah.
But also it did something else. It brought kids who were alienated from the school community into the school community. It gave them a stake in keeping peace in the school. The kids who were the leaders of the most violent people in the building had a stake in controlling that. You know, they started to accept the school as their place. The second thing I did was I started a council that I met with as an assistant principal every week of these same kids who were the gang leaders, and they had to talk to each other. And we would talk about what's going on, who's angry, are there any problems coming up, what's going on in the neighborhood, and they would be talking to each other.
We are taping this right now during the Derek Chauvin trial, and we just had another mass shooting in Indianapolis. How are these trials hitting you? Do you see at places where we've made strides? Do you think that, do you see progress? Are you hopeful still, as you earlier said, about race relations in this country? Because we really are at a fever pitch point, you know, where there's still a lot of places where I'm still learning about things that happened in our country's past that I didn't know about, particularly in the case of taking property from African Americans within the last 100 years, and the kinds of the legacy that left on their families. I mean, you'd probably just read this in your local paper, Corey. The Manhattan Beach, the Manhattan Beach just gave back a piece of beach to a Black family that had been taken from them in the 1920s.
Yeah, I hadn't read it, but yeah, that's.
And so you've got this whole dialogue going on, but I guess where I sit here in Washington, I find it, I don't find that we have any cool heads talking about it. It's very, very much all or nothing, my way or no way. And I just have to believe that not everybody is in that space, but I know there's a lot of anger out there, and I haven't lived the same experience as my Black brothers and sisters. So I'm not an expert, and I do want to learn. But I don't know if going back to my earlier question, Ronnie, if how this is hitting you, the Derek Chauvin trial in particular.
I think the Chauvin trial happening at the same time as the Dante Wright murder is giving us an opportunity to really look carefully at the relationship between police and minority communities in a nuanced way. The Chauvin case was so glaringly obvious that it didn't challenge me. I mean, the guy should be locked up and put away, and he murdered the guy. I mean, it's as simple as that. And all the other stuff is bullshit. But Potter, that looks like it was really an accident. And an inexcusable accident for an experienced police officer. But I don't think she woke up that morning with the intention of abusing a Black person. At least not based on the videos that we've seen. So now we have to reckon with the fact that we need police officers who are going to make mistakes. You know, I've been in violent situations. I've had guns pointed at me, and I can tell you that the first few times that happens to you, you can't predict what your reaction is going to be. You don't know.
True.
You really don't know. And you can make a decision that'll change your life in a heartbeat that you regret, that if you had a cooler head, you'd never make. But that's the situation we put police in every single day. So we need police, and good police officers are going to make terrible mistakes sometimes. We have to learn how to hold police accountable on a continuum of responsibility. What Chauvin did was gross, and he intended to do it. Whether he intended to kill the guy or not, he intended to exact incredible pain and humiliation on this black man. I don't know if he did it because he was black, but Chauvin definitely.
Well, they had a prior relationship.
Well, I
too,
mean,
right?
I don't want to go into all the details, but I think he is a racist, but that's just me. I'm not going to, I think, I think we have to respect that continuum. And there has to be accountability for mistakes, but it's different than what Chauvin did. And I think this is an opportunity for us to look at this issue in a much more nuanced way and come up with solutions, even if it doesn't come from legislatures, but come up with solutions at the grassroots level.
Well, one of the things I've seen actually is just a call to arms by Blacks to whites saying, if you see a confrontation between a white police officer and a Black person, or just a conversation, hang around a little longer. Now, and be prepared to stick up for somebody. I don't think nobody I know is even watching out for each other at that level. I think that demands a real understanding that we are our brother's keeper. So I don't know if we're culturally going to go there, but that was an interesting grassroots suggestion.
Well, body cameras and everybody having a cell phone makes that possible without having to put yourself in danger, right? I mean, we have a record of Chauvin because 10 years ago, we wouldn't have known what happened.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a good thing.
What do you think, Corey?
Well, I want to again remember that someone like Derek Chauvin is the exception to the rule. It's always important to keep that in mind.
I'm not asking for you to be judge and jury. I'm just curious if you feel like you've seen anything come out of it that strikes you as different.
I think I have been paying attention to the trial. The prosecution had a very, very strong case. What the defense was able to put up, there were certain witnesses that the defense put up that if you walked away and then saw the prosecution's cross-examination, some of the witnesses that the defense put up, if you walked away and just saw the the prosecution's cross-examination, you would think that was their witness. There were a couple of witnesses that really broke down. But I mean, to most objective observers, this really is a black and white case. But there were other really egregious black and white cases that ended up in a hung jury. That, it just takes one. It is a jury, and it just takes one person who their conscience just can't bring them to convict. It also depends on the charges. The charges are second degree murder, third degree murder, and manslaughter. And they're defined subtly differently in each state, which, by the way, a really good resource. There was Advisory Opinion. Sarah Isger and David French have a really good resource for non-lawyers as well as for lawyers. It's a great podcast, and a lot of the most contemporary legal cases. It's so informative. So that's a really good resource for me. But they, in fact, I think their most recent episode, they break down the trial and their views on the trial in great detail. So, I think that the prosecution made a great case. The defense had a relatively weak to moderate at best case, but
it does come down to the jury.
It really does. And I fear for that region. I fear for the country if there isn't some sort of conviction. It would be hard to imagine that there isn't at least a conviction on manslaughter. Believe it or not, I think as I learned the differences between second and third degree murder, I think there's a better chance of conviction on second degree murder than third degree murder, just because of some of the ways that third degree murder is defined. And ironically, it's the penalties are essentially the same thing, but yeah, I think there needs to be one of the two murder convictions to avoid some serious fallout.
The consequences of the verdict should not affect the verdict.
It shouldn't. But
it shouldn't. I mean, and the guy should be judged based on what he did, not on what the reactions of the public will be to the verdict. That said, I mean, I think the evidence is overwhelming. This guy intended to inflict pain on George Floyd. That was his intention. I mean, it seems pretty clear from the video.
It also appears, and this is more of just.
I think the Potter case is more difficult.
Well, what I was going to say about Chauvin was this is more sociological, kind of human behavior, observational, is that at least those last 3 to 4 minutes was Chauvin asserting his authority, asserting his will, almost in a performative manner for the people who had gathered around him, basically saying, excuse the expression, but I'm the big swinging dick and you can't do anything about it. So I'm sorry to be so coarse about it, but that you can't watch that video without just as an observer of human behavior. I don't know how you could draw any other conclusion. And that's not good policing. Some of my really, really dear friends are right here in this town are, 25, 30 year law enforcement officers at different levels. And it grieves them when they see this kind of behavior. But we were talking on a different level. We were talking about teachers. Every teacher in the school know who the bad teachers are. It grieves them because they're devoting their lives to keeping our community safe. And here you got folks that are abusing their position because they're wearing a gun and have a badge, and it makes their job harder. It makes my friend. It makes my friends' jobs harder when they see this.
Do you think you got more or less hopeful during COVID-19? I mean, you know some of the underbelly of your own community during this season. If you pile COVID-19 on top of that and the isolation and the lockdown, any thoughts there?
I don't think we'll know for another 5 years.
What age groups of kids do you think were most adversely affected by the lockdown from your educational background? Because I think it's the youngest that probably lost the most learning, for example.
And the kids who were most behind before the crisis.
Yeah.
You know what improving the education system and making schools better isn't rocket science. It really is.
Seems to be. We haven't been able to do it.
We can't.
We still don't have better outcomes than other countries.
We can do it. What we need is teachers who really care about kids and who know how to teach and have smaller class sizes so that every kid can get individual attention from a loving, nurturing, responsible adult who has high expectations of that kid.
Dad, this is a sticking point. It seems that the teachers' unions largely are getting in the way of quality teaching, frankly. It seems that the existence of the unions or the perpetuation of the teachers' unions is there to protect an average, the whole, which includes bad teachers. I don't know. Maybe I'm not articulating it well, but it seems like, Eddie taught, Uncle Jerry taught, you and Mom taught. You were in schools for 35 years plus, and everybody knew who the bad teachers were. This is, Eddie experienced this at charter school level, public school level. just
who's this
recently,
Eddie person you're talking about?
my brother
Oh,
Eddie,
okay. Just wanted to make sure.
the most educated truck driver now, because he got so frustrated with the education. This is part of what he was so frustrated with the education system, is that everybody knew who the bad teachers were, but because the unions are there to protect every teacher, including bad teachers, it seems that there's disincentives to create structures that reward good teachers, to get rid of bad teachers. I don't know. Could you talk to some of this? Speak to some of this. You're more informed on it than I am.
Well, it's the best of times and the worst of times kind of thing. The unions were great.
I'm going to start my next book that way, by the way.
Yeah, I think it's already been used.
So it's so original.
Yeah. The unions were great at getting good compensation for teachers. They were great at controlling class size, getting benefits for people who deserve benefits, but they're awful in terms of protecting mediocrity, even incompetence. But what I think is demonizing unions is the easy way out. It's not just the unions, it's the whole system. It's the fact that, look, maybe it's changed now, because I don't know what a smart board is. I've heard the term, but I have no idea what it is. But, when I was working, schools were organized like factories. They look, at least in New York, they look like factories, right? These big brick buildings. And what you do is you move a kid from one room to another, and they're going to become social studies experts in 201, and in 301 they're going to learn math. And you move them around like cans on a conveyor belt. And then at the end of 4 years, they're supposed to be educated. Then you get teachers trained by people in colleges who've never been in a classroom. I have 2 graduate degrees in education, and I think I took maybe 3 courses that taught me anything I needed to know. I drove a yellow cab in Manhattan for 5 years on and off. I learned more in that fucking cab that helped me as a guidance counselor than I did in a classroom.
Yeah. Well, this gets me kind of thinking just about how much we're not being served by our broader academic structure anyway, because I think we have so much, and it's not a condemnation of higher education, but it's that we prioritize and idolize and lift up academia at the cost of all of the kinds of practical know-how that you would have gotten in that cab.
Or better yet, practical know-how if I had to serve as an apprentice in education for 3 to 5 years before being thrown into a classroom of 34 kids and given a textbook and said, teach.
Did you have to get a master's degree while you were teaching? Was that part of the expectation?
Well,
for you to maintain your employment?
The short answer is yes. In March of 19.
I ask because I wonder if that's really something we need to expect of teachers, if they really need to have a master's degree.
If I was the education god, I would redesign the entire training system. Quite frankly, I would train teachers more the way I would train plumbers than the way they're being trained. Apprenticeship.
Hands-on experience.
I would give the principal absolute power to fire anybody in their first 3 years. When I was a guidance counselor, one of the things I'm proudest of is that I spoke explicitly to kids, not only about the technical details of sex and condoms and all that stuff. I talked to them explicitly about my sexual life, that I was married, that I was monogamous, that I never cheated on my wife, and I was probably getting more and better sex than anybody else they knew. Mm-hmm. And I was, in many, many schools, I was the official condom distributor because there weren't that many people who felt comfortable distributing condoms to kids. So I got the opportunity to talk about sexual relationships to lots and lots of kids. And making my message always was, look, if you're going to have sex, you have to be responsible. And exploitive sex isn't, it's not the way to go. The way to go is to have sex in a loving relationship, for it to be an act of love, not an act of use and abuse. And I would talk to kids about this, kids who had never heard anybody talk to them that way.
Yeah, I can imagine that was really refreshing.
I'll tell you a quick story that brings tears to my eyes. When I was a counselor in the 80s, I had two occasions to bring kids home to live with us for about 6 months. Kids who would have ended up dead, in jail, whatever, who are really good, bright, nice kids who needed that extra structure and support. So one of these kids was a kid named Vaymon Biggs. He came to live with us when Corey was about 13.
Yeah.
And he lived with us for about 6 months. And thank God it worked. He graduated high school, went on with his life. And I didn't see him again for about 2 or 3 years. He showed up in my office on a Friday afternoon with this duffel bag and an army uniform, and said, "Look, I'm deploying to Germany on Monday. Can I come and spend the weekend with you guys? I miss you." Yeah, so I said, "Sure, Vaymon. I'll take you home. I'll bring you back to Brooklyn on Monday when I come back to work. No big deal." And before we left, we're having breakfast on Monday morning. He said, "There's a book in your son's room where I'm sleeping. Can I take it with me to Germany?" I said, "Sure." What book? To Be a Jew. It was the book we used to give to kids on their bar mitzvahs. The synagogue would give them a present, To Be a Jew, by Donut, I think it is. It's like a handbook of all the stuff you got to do to be a Jew, a good Jew. So I said, "Sure, Vaymon, are you considering converting?" He said, No, but there's a chapter in there about how to be a good husband. Yeah. He said, "The only time I've ever seen anyone treat a woman the way you treat your wife is in your house. And this chapter describes what a man has to do to be a good husband. And I want to learn that." Now, I may have been the only person in these kids' lives who was that kind of a role model for monogamy, for faithfulness, for love. That's very important to me, that I was able to do that for kids. And I think I did it for my own kids. They're both in 2021 in marriages that are like 25, 30 years. They're both in good, stable marriages. That's a tremendous accomplishment as a father, I think.
Did you read that same chapter?
No,
Corey?
Vaymon took the book.
You didn't need the chapter. You lived with the lesson. There you go.
Yeah. Vaymon taught.
Do you feel like you learned that from your dad, though?
Yeah. I see it in my kids now. They learn most about who you are, and they model who you are. So they're all at an age where we have these great talks and stuff like that. But more than our talks are really a residual of a relationship and, my behavior over the last 20 years. And my behavior is a reflection of my character. And similarly, at growing up, I think that those things that my father was and is, those are the things that resonated with me at the deepest levels.
It seems to me that half of the world if not more, think that there's some kind of conflict between being nurturing and being a strict disciplinarian. I happen to think that in order to be nurturing, you have to be a strict disciplinarian when you're a parent or a teacher. I think one without the other is horrible. There's no conflict between structure, high expectations, and love. They go together. As long as neither side gets abused.
I feel like there's a lot more to talk about, but one piece of business I want to make sure to cover. Jessica, you are a published author. Can you tell us how to find your book, Crossing, which is a great book? We talked about it on our episode about
Yeah. Well, aside from the fact that it's right here, it's also on Amazon. It plays into, I think, what it's called Crossing the Divide, 20 Lessons to Help You Thrive in Cross-Cultural Environments. And it does pick up on a lot of the skills that I can well imagine Ronnie has in spades. Listening, approaching people that are different from you as a student, setting expectations about conflict, different cultural settings for conflict. But I really just have a thirst for knowledge and understanding. And this was an effort to put it all down and have people have a chance to read it and use the skills here to better their work environments and their professional and personal arcs. It's
a great read. A lot of great takeaways. Crossing the Divide. Give it a look, give it a read. And Jessica, this is great fun. I've already learned a lot from you as a journalist, so thank you. And I hope.
And did you learn anything new about your dad? Because that's what I was going for. Please tell me yes, but if you say no, then I'll have to come back and have another go.
I'm gonna have to give this a listen because, it's kind of like, you've been on stage. So a lot of times when you have, when you're in the moment, you get off stage.
Yeah.
I really have no idea, so I'm going to have to give this a listen when I'm not, in it. And can I circle back around on that one for you? Because I hope that this is the start of something. How does it go? What's the last line of Casablanca? This could be the start of a beautiful friendship.
Relationship. Or we could just sing the 70s song by the Carpenters, We've Only Just Begun.
Yeah.
Which is my parents' theme song from their hippie wedding in Golden Gate Park.
That's awesome. All right, Jessica. Well, thank you so much. Pops, thank you.
Thank you.
And thank Mom for her little cameo, crossing the stage there with the at exactly the perfect time. So thanks. Send love to Mom.
I got to meet Phyllis. I'm dying to meet Phyllis. Tell her next time she's got to come on too. I don't know if she's as open book as you are, Ronnie, but
she's an open book in a very different way.
Phyllis, I'm not a very deep person. You get
really. You don't say.
No, not a.
What are you talking about?
Here I am. Take me.
This is more of this tongue-in-cheek stuff.
I'm.
You're being a wise ass again.
I'm from Brooklyn, and I'm Jewish, and it goes with territory. But I'm really not very deep, and there's not much to what you see is what you get. My wife, on the other hand, it's like
still waters.
It's like
deep?
peeling an onion.
Okay, and you're never bored, are you? How many years you been married?
We're married 54 years. We've been together 57 years, and I'm still crazy in love. I really am. So, and at the age of 74, this is the person I want to spend all my time with. So, it's good. God was good to me.
Well,
I've been blessed.
Yes, you have been. Thanks for spending a little bit of it with us. We'll let you get back to Phyllis now.
Thank you for joining us today. If you appreciate what you've heard here, please go to iTunes or anywhere you get your podcasts. Give us a 5-star rating and leave a review. That really helps move us up the chart so others can find out what we're up to here. For Ronnie Nathan, I'm Corey Nathan, and we've been talking politics and religion without killing each other. We'll be back in a few days to do our little part in Tikkun Olam.